Welcome to the SRS Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron J. Babiar, and I'm the Training Director of Support Raising Solutions. Whether you're a new ministry worker or a veteran looking to increase your competence and confidence, Support Raising Solutions seeks to bless you in your quest to be a spiritually healthy, vision-driven, fully funded Great Commission worker. My guest today is Callie Buchholtz. And Callie, once again, you have graced our podcast airwaves here to talk about a topic that's important to support raisers. And so first of all, let me just start with saying, welcome back. Glad you're here.
Glad to be here, Aaron.
Welcome to Northwest Arkansas. So glad that you are in our area now. But one of the things that I'm excited about with you being here is you can finally help me have the perfect support raising presentation, right? Because you know all about perfection and the perfect support raising presentation, right?
Well, you could say that, or maybe a little more accurately, I learned how you can't ever have the perfect support raising appointment.
So true, so true. And that's really, of course, what we're talking about today. So let's set the table a little bit first. How long have you lived off of, well, of course, you had to raise it first, but how long have you raised and lived off support and been fully funded?
A little over 7 years now.
Okay. And as you went through that initial process, at what point did you realize I might not actually have a perfect presentation at any point?
Oh, it took a while. Probably at least 3 years into it. I mean, I knew I wasn't perfect, but I kept trying to get to perfection and kept tweaking and trying to get to something in my head that I thought, then everyone will say yes. I'll say everything right. And just the doors of heaven, and there'll be butterflies and doves floating down or something.
Wow, I've never had that good of a presentation. I don't know if I ever shot that high, but I might have to now. So.
Well, yeah, no, I never got there either.
Well, okay, so people want to have a great presentation, but that can be problematic. I mean, that can really be an issue when any of us try and be perfect for a number of reasons. I mean, well, first, just step briefly on the fact that none of us are Jesus 2.0. We have issues. We're being sanctified, and our salvation is by grace through faith alone in Jesus Christ. But even within that, doesn't matter how much you practice and really work on and tweak a presentation. The reality is no two meetings ever go alike, do they?
Never. It's people are different and your relationships with them are going to be different. So how that conversation unfolds will always have some variances.
Mm-hmm. Now, I will say that in the support raising boot camps that we do we do dig into what are some of the many variables that can come up in a presentation. That's one of the reasons it's so important that people actually get trained on support raising, not just have a lot of faith in God, which we want you to have a lot of faith in God, but actually get some training. And so we're not going to dig into every single little thing because this is not a training podcast. It's more of a conversation. It's more of a coaching type thing. And yet that urge to be perfect, there's some personalities that they're going to have a hard time not doing that. And yet we also want people to strive to have great communication. So unpack that for me better, Callie, and for our listeners. Where are those lines of delineation between good enough and not good enough and perfect? And, well, you don't have to be perfect, but maybe you should try a little bit.
Right. I think it's really important to see the difference between putting in the effort to be prepared and to walk into appointment knowing what you want to share, what are the key points you don't want to leave out, how you want to explain certain things, compared, like, there's that. And then on the other side, you have holding this weight of pressure and expectation of what you think you should be able to do that you really don't need to be holding at all. They say you should practice something about 20 times before you can say it naturally, whether that's just a story, whether it's an elevator pitch, whether you're turning in your resume to someone or a support raising appointment. That's a lot of practice. That's a lot of preparation.
That's a lot, particularly when we assume, at least, that a boot camp teaches this also, that we want people to be prepared for about a 20-minute conversation / presentation. And yet it can definitely go shorter. It can definitely go longer. People can ask us a number of questions that could kind of throw us off a little bit. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that goes into all that.
Absolutely. I think what really clarified to me this kind of difference between being prepared and expecting perfection in myself was when I was in a period of increasing support. I'd been on support for 3 years. I was traveling around visiting all my supporters, and I was visiting with a college friend of mine, and I was asking her to increase support. And I don't know if it was just stressed out after doing so many asks and so many appointments or what, but I dropped the ball when it came to being bold and asking her to increase. I asked for an increase, but it was not very much. And it was, even as those words were out of my mouth, I kind of thought, I probably should have asked for more. I should have been bold instead of holding back on my own fear. But I finished the appointment and she said yes, which was fantastic.
Awesome.
But I couldn't get that out of my head of what if I had done more? And so I picked up the phone the next day and I said, listen, I am so glad you said yes. I'm so glad you're on my partnership team, but I feel like I did you a disservice. I have this financial need and I want you to be as much a part of it as God is calling you to. And I think that might be more than just what I asked. Would you be willing to do, and I think I asked for $150 more.
Wow.
I was going really bold, and she didn't say yes to the full amount, but she increased more than what she'd said previously. And that's where this light bulb went off in my head of, oh my word, I don't have to be perfect about this every time. I can make mistakes. I can go back to people. I can ask for grace and invite them into the process of them seeing that I'm not perfect.
Yeah. Well, and giving yourself the grace and knowing the grace is also from God. And like you just said, though, but asking them for grace. If you're enjoying these podcasts and they're hitting on topics that you love, consider following Support Raising Solutions on social media for everyday biblical and practical support raising advice as you're in the process of raising your support. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/support raising solutions and on Twitter at support raising.
I want to interrupt this podcast for a brief heads up. This is Steve Shadrach, author of The God Ask. Support Raising Solutions is running a contest to win an SRS swag pack. Go check out our past podcast episode number 29 to get details on how you can get involved and possibly win some fun Support Raising Solutions swag, including a $100 gift card.
I want to say something a little bit differently, and I apologize. Now, we're not telling everybody listening to the podcast you need to go back to all of your supporters right now and ask them for more money. We're not saying maybe in a couple of cases you should. Of course, you don't say it that way. You do it more like what Callie was just saying. But, inviting people into the process of the understanding, or maybe even a number way to say it is, I need to be honest with you regarding the ministry, not just the vision, but also the financial situation. I'm going to update you, if it's okay, on where we're at. I think that's a really healthy thing to do, even after somebody is already on your team. But that's a different podcast, isn't
it? Right. That's a whole nother topic to unpack. I think what's interesting is where I also saw this play out, not just when I was asking for support, but even asking for appointments, dealing with the people that I knew might have some reservations as soon as I mentioned money, and wanting to make sure I asked in the most perfect way possible, that they got the fact I was talking about this vision of what God was doing. And I really wanted to share in relationship. And if I got the wording just right, then they would agree to an appointment. Versus saying no and being offended and walking away in a huff or whatever else could have happened.
Right.
And realizing that, well, I had mixed success in always getting the perfect verbiage, but then admitting to them that I didn't know the perfect way to say this. And so it has drastically changed how I approach certain people that I think might be a little more sensitive to asking to sit down with them to talk about ministry and finances. Because I'll open with it saying, I care more about our relationship than anything else. And I'm a little concerned that what I want to share with you, you might find maybe a little too direct, a little too offensive. My heart is that God is doing something, and I want to share that with you. And I want to invite you to be a part of that. But I'm worried about how you'll say it, because if I use the one or two wrong words, that's all you're going to hear instead of my heart. Can we talk about this?
Wow. That right there is so wise. Sometimes in certain situations, we can sense that there's a tension there. And by just acknowledging that tension or the elephant in the room, a lot of times it can go away. But you go, hey, I want to acknowledge this is here, but I also feel like God's doing something I want to share with you. Is it okay if I do? A lot of times the fact that somebody knows that you cared enough to even acknowledge it, that's going to be enough. And they're going to go, oh, yeah, of course. Or they're going to say, no, I really don't want to talk about money at all. Well, then you know where you stand. Now, I've never had anybody say that to me. I think it's possible somebody might at some point, but then you know where you stand and how long the meeting needs to go at that point, don't you?
Absolutely. Oh, yeah.
So as people are thinking about having a great presentation and yet giving themselves permission to not be perfect, there are some things, though, that, and you touched on this before, that they need to practice. And
yes.
So in practicing, 20 times, that's a lot. How do you practice a presentation knowing that it's going to be a little squirrely and every one of them is going to go different? You have different personalities, you're meeting in different places. How do you practice all that?
Well, I think one of the great ways to start is with the people that are walking with you in this journey, whether you're first in ministry, whether you're amid the ministry that you're doing, your family, your mentors, your close friends, the people you live life with, the people that are willing to sit through multiple presentations as you're learning how to tweak things and how you want to share things best. And starting with the people you have the deepest relationship with, because they are generally going to lend more grace and be naturally more forgiving as you make mistakes, as you get to a point and say, oh, I forgot this, or let me reshare that story because I forgot a really important part that I'd love to share with you. And then as you get more comfortable, you can take a little bit more risks as you're talking with the friends of friends, with the referrals, the people that you don't have that past built up with.
Right. So I'm going to push back on you just a little bit, though. And you're not wrong in anything. So I mean, no disrespect, Callie. However, I'd say be very careful, though, in how much weight you put on the feedback from somebody who has never raised or lived off support. And so you do need to practice, but you need to be speaking with someone. Now, SRS does not provide coaches for everybody. We do our best with the podcast. Of course, if you go through a boot camp, we send you 15 weeks of articles and other audio. I mean, there's all kinds of resources we give. And yet, we really need to be able to urge people, have some coaching from someone who actively raises and lives off support, particularly if you're in your first season of ever trying to get fully funded. There's going to be some perspective and wisdom that comes from time, that comes from perspective, that you're not going to get from your grandma who loves you no matter what you say. I mean, you really have to consider your audience as you're practicing.
And you don't want to skew what you think you should share to everyone based on the one appointment with the one person who asks a million financial questions. There's always one of them. Most people don't want all that information, but if you are basing your presentation based on their feedback, you're going to end up skewing it to one way or the other. So having informed feedback is really important, Aaron. You're absolutely right.
Well, and that's a great example because unfortunately I do have a friend that he went through a boot camp. He was chugging along and all of a sudden it's like the wheels fell off his support raising presentations, which I don't expect perfection, but it went from pretty good to pretty bad in short order. And finally I dug in. I said, give me your presentation. I got to hear what's going on here. And it came down to he had got advice from someone that didn't know what they were talking about. And it was well-intended, God-loving advice, but it was bad advice. So we do need to be careful as we're practicing. We can't expect perfection, and yet we do need to have a standard of who it is we're we're listening to when it comes to feedback?
I think one of the most helpful ways to look at feedback from the people you're presenting to, your family, your friends, is looking at what questions they ask. More so than, oh my word, you really should share so much more here. But if you start hearing the same questions from multiple people, that kind of can clue you in, oh, maybe that's something that should be a regular part of my presentation, because it's something that people are always wanting to hear more about.
Yeah, so I'm going to say that again. That was so good. If you consistently get the same question or feedback from various people as you're raising support, something is not clear enough in your presentation that's eliciting that question. And so maybe it's you just add a sentence or a paragraph in your normal presentation that eliminates that question from happening later on. It might not be that simple, but the odds are it might very well be. And you can avoid taking that extra time to re-explain the same thing again and again in every presentation because the question keeps coming up. So that was really good, Callie. That right there, that was a perfect answer, Callie.
Oh dear, it's my one and only.
Well, in summary, there's no such thing as a perfect presentation, and yet it does take work. It takes focus. Obviously, you need to be praying and thinking and tooling and tinkering and continuing to get better. But there does come a point for most people I know who are fully funded where they became a little bit more comfortable in their ability to have a conversation. That was a presentation, but it felt more like a conversation. But it took work, it took practice, and it took a willing heart that wanted to learn and improve without expecting perfection. Callie, any last words that you'd like to give us before we close out the podcast today?
Well, I guess just that I hope most of you have had a chance to take a deep breath of fresh air, because I know that happens with a lot of people that I share this with. Oh, you don't have a perfect presentation? You have vulnerable conversation with your partners, and it doesn't have to be the exact perfect wording every single time, and just this relief flows over them. Yeah. Yes, we want you to be prepared. We want you to be equipped to speak well, to have, a capability when you're talking about your ministry and the work that you're doing, so that you are a good face for that ministry, that people walk away with understanding, but not with this kind of burden of having the exact perfect presentation or conversation. Yeah. So have the freedom in that to do well and to speak with excellence, but not with perfection.
Great. Well, Callie, thank you again for joining us today. I always appreciate your input and your wisdom and your ability to walk alongside people who are, God willing, moving towards or continuing to be spiritually healthy, vision-driven, and fully funded. Thank you for your time.
Of course. It's an honor to be here, Aaron.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. We would love to hear your ideas for future content. Please visit supportraisengsolutions.org/feedback to share your thoughts and questions. Also, wherever you download your podcast from, be sure to subscribe for future episodes and come back each week to gain more insight into the process of building and maintaining your personal support team.